After hundreds of years of occupation, many generations of people in Britain had grown up surrounded by Roman culture. And after a long period of stability, that culture was showing visible signs of wealth, success, and good living. This fabulous mansion, Littlecote House, was built nearly 500 years ago by Sir Edward Darrell. The family must have had some status because one of their relations was a girl called Jane Seymour, and she was courted right here in the 1530s by Henry VIII. Most people think that Tudor mansions like this were the earliest stately homes in Britain. But what even the Darrells didn't realise was that right at the bottom of their garden there had been another luxury villa built 1200 years earlier by a member of the landed gentry in Roman Britain. These flint walls show a layout that was typical of the Roman villas that were springing up all over the country in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. What amazes me is that in some respects this place was more advanced technologically than the Tudor mansion next door. We think it may have looked a bit like this. It's obviously a very substantial house, stone built, 2 floors with 3 in the turrets and probably a tiled roof. Now in the roof there would probably be in the servants' quarters and then up here somewhere bedrooms and so on. 1 floor down you can see these are the main reception rooms with wonderful mosaic floors, really beautiful, in at least 3 of the rooms. And the high-tech bit comes underneath those floors. Have a look at this. Here we have the hypercaust, the central heating system, with a furnace here and perhaps here, and then the hot air and the smoke and the fumes being drawn out all the way through all these gaps under the floors and up the vents into the roof. Every villa would have had its wonderful mosaic floors. Unfortunately, the ones in the main house have long gone, but down at the other end of the building, one of these wonderful floors survives. Probably more than anything else, what symbolised good living for the Romans was bathing. It wasn't just about washing, it was more a way of life. In bath houses, they could meet friends, do business, exchange gossip, and of course, relax. This is the Great Pool at the bathing complex at Bath, or Aqua Sulis, as the Romans called it. Here, the Romans took bathing to the heights of luxury and sophistication. They took advantage of an existing natural hot spring, which was already a Celtic shrine, and converted it into a suite of baths with various different functions. These are the remains of a hot, steamy room, rather like a Turkish bath. And this is what's left of a hot, dry room, rather like a modern sauna. It's not surprising that the place where the water actually gushed out of the ground was regarded as a sacred place. Originally, it was dedicated to the Celtic goddess Sulis, but then the Romans came along with their goddess Minerva, and together they combined to create the super deity, Sulis Minerva. The baths are a masterpiece of hydraulic engineering. Today, most of the water's coming out in this single open channel. But 1800 years ago, there were pipes all over the place. Have a look, just here. This is an original Roman lead pipe. And if you look, it's got a wonderful seam along here where the edges have been rolled right over tightly. It looks to me as though they pumped the water along here at high pressure. When it emerged from the nozzle, it must have come with invigorating force, giving the people in this bath a terrific pummeling, which they couldn't have experienced again until the whirlpool bath was reinvented hundreds of years later. Of course, Bath was special because it was sitting on top of its own hot spring. But in many other places, the passion for bathing meant they had to bring the water from miles away, and often somewhere quite high up, well above the local river, for example. So how did the Romans get their water? Well, by applying their ingenuity to building some of the finest examples of Roman engineering, the aqueducts. Some of them were spectacular and even a little ostentatious, like the Pont du Gard at Nîmes in France. This 3-tiered bridge over the valley carried not just water, but foot passengers and even chariots. Other aqueducts were rather simpler.
This green path running between the buttercups along this terrace which the Romans cut out of the hillside marks the position of an aqueduct which snaked its way all along this valley to the military bathhouse in Dorchester. But where did they get their water from? Well, the nearest source was the River Frome, but that was much too low down to be any use. What they needed was a good supply of clean water well above the level of the camp.
And what they eventually found was a stream 9 miles away. But the stream was only 10 metres higher than the camp at Dorchester, so their aqueduct had to follow the contours of the hill at a very shallow gradient. Archaeological evidence shows that the aqueduct was constructed of timber-lined channels dug into the hillside and covered over with removable lids topped by turf. It's been estimated that it could have supplied about 13 million gallons a day, more than enough to run several bathhouses and public fountains. This bathhouse is an exact copy of one at Chester's, a fort on Hadrian's Wall. It's the best preserved military bathhouse in Britain, and it was lavishly equipped. It follows the standard Roman system of cold, warm and hot rooms. And back at Wallsend, they've gone the whole hog with the furnace. But how did this extraordinary system work? Well, it's all down to that legendary Roman hypocaust. Right next to the hot room was a great big furnace, and the job of the slaves was to keep this furnace stoked up and blazing furiously. Now, the point of this fire was really twofold. First of all, it heated the water in a great big boiler on top, and that heated up the bath. But also, perhaps more important, if you look in the back there, you can see there's a long tunnel going away. That's where the smoke and the hot air go, and it goes into the hypocaust. And if you look very carefully on the left, you can just see the pili, the columns that are holding up the floor, and that's where all this heat is going to go. The hypocaust in this building is fully functional, but they've also built a separate section cut away so you can see how it works. And if you look down, you can see all the piles here, and you can see the flues where the hot air and smoke were drawn up the walls. So all the walls and the floor are wonderfully warm. Many of the bathhouses were beautifully decorated with frescoes. Oh, this has to be the frigidarium, the cold plunge pool. They probably would have started in here with a brief dip. Well, I love the fish, but I'm not quite sure about the water. Oh, you wouldn't want to spend too long in there. Heated rooms led off cold ones, some with floors so hot you couldn't walk on them. And from there, there'd be a whole range of steam rooms, Turkish baths and saunas. Of course, one of the things you'd want to do in a bathhouse is get clean. But to get clean, the Romans didn't use soap. Instead, they used olive oil. And what they would do is to pour it on their skin, just like this, just a little bit, and then rub it in so it would mix with all the sweat. They've got a nice sweat up now. And then they would take this thing, which is called a strigo, a metal scraper, and they would scrape it off like this. And what comes off is a mixture of all the olive oil and all the dirt that's been pushed out of the pores by the sweat. Now this gloop, if it came from athletes and gladiators, was highly prized by ladies who used to collect it and make it into a face pack to collect all that youth and vigour. And then there was the caldarium, the hot room. It's really nice in here. The floor's hot, the walls are warm, and the water, well, it's just like a hot bath. It's lovely. Imagine quite a lot of people in here all having a great time together. You could gamble, you could play board games with your friends. There were snacks like oysters and wine. It was a terrific place for relaxing after all the rigours of camp life. Sometimes we imagine that we invented bathing for pleasure, but the Romans had it all sussed 2,000 years ago. For the wealthy, An afternoon in the bathhouse would be followed by the main meal of the day, and I'm not one to break with tradition.